Okay, we are live. What an exciting time that I have the opportunity to spend with the three of you today. So welcome to RootsTech. We're talking about stories in this panel today. And I would love for you guys to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and why you're here talking about story. And we'll start with Allie.
Hi, my name is Allie Edwards, and I am a storyteller. And the way that I have found to tell my own stories is through scrapbooking. That really is the method that I use. Which, when we say that, Wendy knows. Sometimes it conjures up very specific images for people of very cutesy sorts of things. And really, my passion in memory keeping and scrapbooking is focusing on the words and the photos, and really. Just love the process, love communicating with other people about it, love encouraging other people to document. And that's really what my entire business and my personal mission is around all of that. So.
And Allie, for people who are meeting you for the first time, they can find you at allieedwards.com.
That's right. Yep.
And
Home
you
base. Yep.
great content that talks about kind of everyday storytelling, which is what we'll
That's my passion. Yeah. Everyday kinds of stories rather than kind of the high points, the birthdays, the Christmases, those sorts of things, but really rooting our stories in the things that we do in our daily lives.
Yes. Oh, it's fantastic to have you here. Okay,
Thank you.
Matt, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
All right, I am a house cleaner by trade. I've been cleaning people's attics for 20 years. I started cleaning my grandparents' attic and then kind of by accident got on TV. Most of you would know me from that TV show Hoarders. I've helped people clean out their really messy homes. And now I have a really cool show on public television on PBS called Legacy List with Matt Paxton. And it's finding history and really powerful stories in your home. And kind of like Allie, like I like the everyday things. I like just the stuff that's in your grandparents' attic, and I like to find out about your story, about your family story. I don't care about what it's worth financially. I want to know what it's worth emotionally. I want to know who had it. What was your grandpa or grandma like? Why do you love them? Why do you care so much? And I found that you can really, remove yourself of the clutter to bring more happiness when you really tell those stories.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love, like you said, the emotional part of you're not interested necessarily in the monetary value. But
I don't care what it's worth financially. I want to know who that really amazing person was, and that's why you love that item.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And Matt, people can find you at, is it I am Matt Paxton?
Actually, TV website is mylegacylist.com. You can watch the TV show and you can find out all of our helpful hints and all those things.
Okay.
mylegacylist.com.
Okay. And Stephen, tell us who you are and how, it's so exciting to have an opportunity to talk with you, even though we work together. This is a fun space to be in.
Well, thanks. I'm honored to be part of this. My name is Stephen Valentine, and I'm with FamilySearch, and feel very privileged to be part of that organization. And I've done a lot of different things with FamilySearch over the years, but the thing I love the most is helping people to tell their stories and helping to share and preserve their stories and really unlocking the power of story in with our ancestors, but also with ourselves and with our posterity, and really understanding that the past, you think about family history, it's a window into the present and to where we're headed. And I love that power of story. So I've kind of, I don't know if anybody at FamilySearch believes this, but I kind of fashion myself as the chief storyteller.
Okay, yes.
I keep saying that to try to talk them into it. We'll see if they glad to be with you.
I think we can change your bio to include that. And that, yes.
Let's give it a try.
So welcome. And as you are participating and watching, we invite you to be thinking about the stories that you have yet to tell and be curious about what opportunities you have to surround yourself with understanding your own story, the stories of those who have come before, and kind of with the lens of thinking of the future as well. And there's fantastic content here on RootsTech, and there's lots of classes around stories. So we invite you to explore those as you're continuing to understand stories. So let's dive in and just say why, you kind of talked a little bit maybe about the types of stories and what you're interested in, but why do stories even matter for people who might be curious about that? And we'll go to you, Matt, first for that question.
Well, I'm biased. I got into this because a lot of people, I came from a big family, and then a lot of people passed away. And so there was an event that made me miss people. And I was grieving and I was sad and I wanted to tell their stories because I didn't want them to go. Like, I still wanted them here. And so for me, 20 years later, I find myself, a lot of my clients call me and they're like, an event, something tragic has happened. And they're just sad. And so what I found is when you tell that story, it's part of the grieving process, but more importantly, it's part of the healing process. And when you tell that story, you're not stuck in the past. I love what Stephen said. It's about the future, right? It's about moving forward. And so I just tell people, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. Because when you talk about your ancestors, you talk about your loved ones, they still live, they're still here. And that brings you more happiness. And so I use it as a way to get unstuck and to move forward.
Wow, this is okay, fantastic. Unstuck, move forward, to really like sort of open up and I think I love what you talked about, the healing. That's something that we've seen a lot in the opportunities we've had at FamilySearch to connect with patrons, is there is sort of an awareness and a healing, and that's a beautiful thing.
The family I came from, we humor was our tool, and the stories we tell you don't tell sad stories. You don't say, remember the time we failed our test and we studied hard. You tell a hilarious story from the past, and it brings you joy and happiness, and you smile and you laugh and you hug. And that is what living is about. So I love the past stories because it gives me a real life to celebrate.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, Stephen, how about you? Why don't you answer that same sort of question?
Yeah, I love what Matt just shared, and I think that sense of identity that we get as well as we tell stories. We actually, as we connect with others and their stories, it also helps us to really learn more about ourselves and about what's important to us. But I mean, look, I'll be perfectly honest. I just think it's fun. And there's nothing wrong with being just pure fun, right? I think it's kind of magic. I mean, stories transport us. And it's either back or forwards. But, I grew up in a little place called Brigham City, Utah. And I liken myself to Luke Skywalker out in this barren desert, like nothing there, right? And I'm like, hey, if Luke can escape and do this cool stuff, there's hope for me, right? I love Brigham City, by the way. Any fans out there? I love my hometown. But I just think there's magic in the connection with the past and with the present and with people that you share. And when I share a story with you or you share it with me, and Matt just shared that story, I feel like I have a connection now with him. Right? He's opened up a part of himself to me. And I love that personal connection you get with people as you share stories.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love that. I love the personal connection piece. I love this idea of it's almost like a tangible way to just reach out to somebody, build relationships, to understand, to share. Okay, Allie, how about you?
Well, the first thing I wanted to say is you guys are my people. It's very obvious. Thank you, Wendy. I jotted some notes down just for myself to help keep me on track. And the way that I always explain why I love stories and storytelling is really because it helps me make sense of my life, which echoes just what the other guys have said. I don't think that I knew that was what was going to be the result when I first started telling stories, actively telling stories. And for me, I came to it when my son was born, who is going to be 19 next week. I came to it just because I wanted to document some of the things that were happening. But what I've learned in all of those almost 20 years of doing this very regularly, showing up to my own stories, is that it absolutely, without a doubt, helps me make sense of how I'm living. It helps inform the choices that I'm making, because I do a lot of reflecting. I do a lot of looking internally as I'm figuring out what kinds of stories I want to tell. So that's just a huge piece of it for me from a very personal, place, besides that it has become my business. And then the other reason why I wrote down that I really love and value stories is just the connection with other people, which is what you guys have talked about too. And for me, that's really been the case, especially online, which can sometimes be such a, there's a lot of about some of the online stuff, but my experience has been through the sharing of my own stories, really beautiful connections with other people that are sharing their own stories from all over the world, not just here in my own community. And I feel like those kinds of that kind of story sharing really humanizes everyone. And we get to learn more about other people and different, life experiences. And I'm 45. I think I'm 45. I think I'm 45 right now. And I feel like even right now, yesterday, there's just so many things that I'm continuing to learn through listening to stories shared by other people, especially related to different life experiences, socioeconomic, racially, all those kinds of things. The more I have exposure to those kinds of stories, the more I have empathy, the more I learn about myself and learn about the world. So it's big passion.
Big passion and fantastic. And you are amongst friends and everyone joining us. We just appreciate that we're all coming together to understand story. And like Ali said, I think it helps you, understand yourself as you move through things, especially in a way to sort of connect to humanity. We talked connection, we talked healing. These are all things that are very valuable and help us. I would love to hear from each of you about a personal story that has perhaps impacted you significantly, something in your life that you've revisited time and time again. And we're here, you're in your homes, I'm in my home, people watching are in their homes. So there's an invitation to be a little vulnerable here if you feel comfortable. But Stephen, I'm going to go to you first, and then Ali and Matt will go to you guys next.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Well, so the story that I was going to tell actually has to do with an object. So Matt, you might like this. It's around this piece of metal, and I don't know if like.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we can see it when you hold it.
That piece of metal.
Wow.
So several years ago, I was up in my hometown of Brigham City, where my parents still live, and there's a field next to their house, and it's been in the family since the 1870s, and just right next to the family home. And my son and I and a friend of mine were out metal detecting out in that field to see, what could we find out here? There's some treasures out here, right? And as we're going along and we're getting some pings down on the ground, and we're picking up, like old bottle caps and different things, and just tossing the scrap aside, and found some other kind of cool things. But then all of a sudden we got a really solid ping, and we dig down deep, and this piece of metal came out of the ground, and it was way down in there. I mean, it was a good, it was pretty deep. And I looked at it, and it was all, covered with mud, and I tossed it into the scrap pile. And my friend, who knows quite a bit about a lot of things, says, no, let me see that. And he grabs and says, I know what that is. And he says, I can tell what that is. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. And he says, that's a piece of a harmonica. And then you could see it, like, okay, that is. And so at that point, my father, who's in his late 80s, who had been looking at this whole thing like it was voodoo magic, like he didn't believe any of this, right? He comes rushing over and says, no, wait a minute, let me see that. And he took it in his hands like it was some sacred object. He's like, I know exactly what that is. And that's probably been in the ground since the 1920s. And he says, so he tells me a story about his brother, who I'd never met. He died in the 1940s. Now, my Uncle Paul was handicapped, and he could never speak, and he couldn't read. And he died when he was pretty young, but he loved music. And he would walk around and he would play this harmonica. And he just loved the sound, and he loved the feel of it. And this was his harmonica that had been sitting down buried in the ground for all these years. And in that moment, it opened up a window into my dad, into what he went through losing his brother, and what my family had lost in this wonderful uncle who I knew nothing about. And it just, all the stories poured out. And suddenly I knew my father in a way I'd never known before. I knew an uncle I had no connection to. And it's just created this bond between my son and my dad and myself. And that's why I think these powerful stories, as we've been talking about, they connect us together, right? It wasn't just a piece of metal. And Matt, I know he talks a lot about this, but to me, this is priceless. To anybody else, it's worth nothing, right? It's my most precious object in my house is this piece of metal, because this means my dad and it means my uncle. And it means I can just see this little boy playing this harmonica and feeling so those are the kinds of stories that really are impactful to me and has made a big difference in my life. So thanks for asking and letting me share that.
Oh, wow. That is a powerful story. And Stephen, to think about a a little bit about the legacy that you have an opportunity to create as someone at FamilySearch. And I think that your uncle wasn't able to speak, but he communicated with the harmonica, and through your work, you're giving voice to people all over the world to be discovered in records. And Stephen, a lot of the work he's done has it is impacted, and lots of other people at FamilySearch too, these connections to people they would have never otherwise discovered. So the harmonica is a personal example of what you do also professionally. And so that is beautiful. Thank you. Allie, talk to us about a story that's had a significant impact on you.
I got so many stories. Okay, but this is a pretty good one.
Okay.
So when Simon is my son that I mentioned, he was the reason why I started scrapbooking originally. And when he was, let's see, he was about a year old when I started scrapbooking. So that would have been the end of 2002. And even in the beginning, when I was first starting scrapbooking, I was interested in those everyday kinds of stories and interested in documenting the very basic things. So, at my home at the time, I have this 1-year-old. This is my first child. I don't have a lot of experience with little kids. That was never my thing. Still might not be my thing. But he, as he was growing and I was documenting things about him, we began to notice that some things about the way that he was developing were not in alignment maybe as they would normally be. And so we began to take him to the doctor and have some tests done and began a conversation about that. And part of what came into those conversations with the doctors was that I had been documenting things about Simon, things like he would gain a new word and then he would lose a word. I told stories about him, how he would lay on the floor and play with the toy cars and things, where he's laying on the floor and they're going back and forth and back and forth. And as a new parent, I'm thinking, this is awesome. If all kids, all little babies can take care of themselves, take care of themselves like this and occupy time, and I can do these other things. Come to find out, Simon was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5. And the documenting that I was doing, the storytelling that I was doing about him really helped to hone in on some of these things that I may have missed otherwise, or that may have taken longer, I think, to help us establish that something wasn't going in the direction that it should be going. And the language is always hard to use when I talk about this, because Simon is the absolute best thing that has ever happened to me, for sure, and our family. And he, as a 19-year-old person with autism, he goes to a community college. He's learning to fly airplanes. Like he just is so amazing. And a lot of the storytelling that I have done over the years has been about him. And the angle that I take with a lot of the stories related to him are celebratory kinds of things. I am always looking for things to celebrate related to him. All of those tiny little wins, the tiny wins in elementary school, the tiny wins where we finally realized that he had a really, really hard time waiting in line, and maybe he just didn't need to wait in line, like that could be a choice that we worked out with the teachers. So continuing to always look for the things that we can celebrate about him, and in sharing those stories online through the work that I do through social media and talking about him, there has been this really amazing worldwide community that has come in to support him and me along the way, because I've been documenting very publicly his story, my story, right? It's my story of my perspective of watching him grow up and getting this gift of being a part of his life. But sharing those stories over the years has, number one, helped let other people know what life with autism can look like from, a parental perspective with having a child where that is the reality, but also really normalizing things and really celebrating all of him, all the pieces of him. And I think for me, that having that be a piece of the story over time in all the different ways that it is that I've shared things about it, and the hard parts as well as the celebratory things. That's really actually an important piece to me in the storytelling that I do, is making sure that I am acknowledging and not sugarcoating the stories of our lives. I think that I find that to be really important, because I don't in the future want anybody to look back on the stories that I've told and think that my life was perfect, or that it was all roses, because that's not the reality for any person, right? That is just not true. And so I advocate and encourage people to talk about both the highs and the lows, and what are the different ways, the different ways that you can approach that. And that's definitely been through the telling a story related to autism. There's been, that's the reality there. So.
Oh, thank you, Allie.
Yeah.
And
I wish that you could meet Simon, because he's so amazing. Like, well,
he is. And I can say that, and all the time, I think I met you, it was before he was diagnosed. So I've been following along this whole time. And I remember when he started swimming, and his graduation, and his love of Star Wars, that he
very big love of Star Wars.
Stephen.
And very intense love.
Yes. I have always felt like the way you've talked about him has been a really generous gift to the rest of us, because you have done it in a way that is so sort of raw, and it allows me to understand a little bit of your experience. So that communication that you have done in his lifetime and continue to do, not only has impacted me, but thousands and thousands of people. And it's beautiful to think about that too, right? What started as
it's been my honor to tell just, my piece of the story, right?
Yes. And it's a beautiful story. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I do think the vulnerability piece is where a lot of the healing can come, that Matt talked about, a lot of like these bonds that Stephen talked about. And I think, Allie, just this understanding of self. And so, I love that. Okay, Matt, talk to us about a significant
well, first
story.
I have to comment on the other two stories first. With Allie, I have to tell you, we also have an autistic son, and we feel sorry for families that don't have an autistic child, because your life's kind of boring and you don't have the consistency and the power of that one kid. Like, our life is so rich because of it. So like, I'm totally, like, honestly, I'm
hugging you, Matt.
I don't know what people do with that on autistic child. Like, I don't know what your life is full of. And dude, Stephen, that harmonica piece, like, that is what my show is about, man. Like, we take random pieces out of people's attics and then out of their house, and we tell that story. And oh my God, to think that's how your uncle communicated. I mean, that is phenomenal. So like, again, what's that piece of scrap metal worth?
Yeah. Nothing to anybody else, right? Yeah.
What's that story worth to your family? Everything. I mean, I love it. And so that is what my show is about, Legacy List. I wish I knew I could have brought props. I had a lot of stories on that. I'm lucky. So my whole job is I tell stories on TV, but I visit people's homes and I get their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this, one thing we've learned by doing this TV show, and I think, Wendy, we've discussed this, every family that I work with, it always ends up with a really strong woman that created that family legacy. There's a strong female somewhere along the line that started telling those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my challenges, I just want all families, like, tell your stories. Now, I'm going to tell a quick story. It's not my family. I just love this story. It's from one of my clients many years ago. It's a hilarious story. This lady, unfortunately, she had passed away, and she had cancer. She knew she was going to pass. It was her last Christmas, and she was like the best like gift wrapper in the world. Like, she had a whole room, kind of like, Allie, what you've got behind you. I mean, she would wrap she would tape it with the proper tape, and it would be on the seal so you couldn't see where the paper started and didn't. And she took like real pride in giving the gifts and wrapping them. And it was her thing. And she was known for gift wrapping. Well, that last year, she just didn't have the strength. She didn't have the hands. She just couldn't do it. And so she gave up, and she's like, I'm gonna write checks. I'm gonna do a card. And so she wrote cards. She just barely scribbled it. She wrote the cards. She insisted on doing it herself. Her hands really weren't good. She put the checks in, sealed them, got them all mailed. And everybody received these cards that Christmas. And and it said, "Merry Christmas, buy yourself your own gift." That's what she wrote on every card. Well, the funeral comes along. We had been hired to clean the house out right after she passed away. The family, it was a big family. So we actually cleaned before the funeral. And one of my guys was cleaning up, we had the honor of cleaning up the wrapping room, and he picked up some wrapping paper, and we found a stack of checks this high. And she had forgotten to put the checks in the cards. So in her mind, everybody's opening these cards with a check that says, "Merry Christmas, buy yourself your own gift." And they received a card that said, "Merry Christmas, buy your own gift." And then, so the family told this story at the funeral, and everybody died laughing. And then they gave out the checks at the funeral.
Oh, that's
Wow.
All right. We all have that woman in our family. I just love that. And I love the humor of them receiving the gifts and be like, "Wow, that's not grandma." Like, and I just, you know, it's a no-name family, but I love these stories. We all have that woman in our family, and whether she's here or with us, but it does, to what Stephen said earlier, it does help us, that story should be told every Christmas, I think. Like, everybody needs to hear that story. I love it. And and I tell that story whenever I can, because it just makes us love our own family, and whoever your characters are in your family.
Yes. And I think I'm going to tell that story. Go ahead.
What's great is that, grandchildren or great-grandchildren that maybe didn't really know her, or maybe they were too young or whatever, they're going to feel like they knew her because they're hearing these stories, right?
Exactly.
You're going to make a connection to somebody you never knew because you're in a shared narrative around.
Well, and that's my job, right? So all my kids, my dad, I lost my dad, my stepdad, both my grandfathers. All four of those men died. And that's why I started cleaning houses. So I had to clean out 4 houses. They all died in 1 year when I was 25. And here I am 20 years later. It's been 20 years this year that they passed. And this is my career. None of my 7 kids ever met those men, but they all know them because I tell all these crazy stories like all the time about them. And I love it.
Wow. And like, that's exactly what I want to talk about right now is how can we recommend, or what sort of tips do you have for people to discover their story? Like, so we're telling these stories and they're great and they're fantastic and they're meaningful and significant, and we know they heal and connect and bond, but what's one recommendation you can give people who are participating, who want to tell their story? And Matt, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
Gosh, I have so many. This is what I do. I actually have started challenging people. So my show's called Legacy List, and a legacy list is, hey, if you're moving or your house burns down, you got 3 or 4 items you want to save. What are they? We write them on a piece of paper. Anyone can do this. Just say, okay, hey, I can only take 5 items with me. Write them down. Write it down, and then go tell the stories. And the issue is you got to have an audience. People have to listen.
Yes.
Right? And that's what we forget. To tell a story, there has to be a second participant to tell that story. I remember how you document it. I tell them, just go write your legacy list. I mean, if you want to watch my show before that, it's fine, but you don't have to. But I would say, just write down your legacy list and share that story. The other thing I love is a thing I call conversation starters, which is literally, you can ask your grandma, your grandpa one, because getting started is the hardest part, right? And like, I think Allie knows, like, people will go and buy all the supplies to make the scrap. They'll buy everything, but actually putting action to momentum is the hard part. So I say conversation starters, which is ask grandma, grandpa, what was his first car? What was their first job? What did they get paid? Who was their first love? Did they do anything in high school? Like, did they play a sport? That's 5 questions, right? Get those questions going, and it gets grandma talking, and you find out things about grandma and grandpa. Like, they're not the little old lady that sits in the corner and holds her purse that right now. She was like a track star.
It was actually a fully formed person.
Yeah. My favorite is when you find a picture of grandma with someone that's not grandpa. And tell me that story. Because then they're like, wait a minute, what is this? And they want to know and I love it. That's my favorite. So just get started is my tip.
Another tip you talk about too, Matt, is like, go and, in your home, what are like you said, what would you grab? But if you're visiting like a relative or someone you're interested in learning about them, ask them about the things that are in their home. And, the stories behind your stuff is so interesting. And I think, like you said, we all want to do this, but sometimes it's just starting. So that legacy list
Just
is
get
a
started. Yeah, legacy is the easy way to do it.
super tip.
And limit it to 5, no more than 5.
No more than 5. Start with 5, and then yeah. Okay, Allie, let's go to you.
I just want to say I love the idea of the, objects as vehicles for stories, right? When we pick up an object, that object has a story. There's a story of how it came to be, of how you use it now, all of those kinds of things. I totally love that. From my perspective, one of the encouraging people to tell the stories of their lives right now is one of the things that I really focus on. And I like projects, and I like projects that have a beginning and an end. And one of the ones that we do is just called Day in the Life. So it's documenting your day. What do you do over the course of the day? And I do this fairly regularly, a couple times a year, so that we're getting it at different points in the year, different times, and things will look a little bit different, or it might look exactly the same. And there's a story in that too. But the invitation to take pictures throughout the day. Everybody has a phone. I mean, most people have a camera phone, or, access to a way to take pictures, and go through your day and set an alarm for each hour of the day. And at that point in time, take a picture of whatever it is that you're doing, and open your notes app and just jot down a little bit about, facts and feelings is what I encourage. Give me some facts about what you're doing right now, and then give me some feelings about how you actually feel about whatever it is, your cup of coffee, the work that you're doing, the way that your kid is screaming at you right now, all that combination of things. And what I find for myself, as well as what I've seen in other people, is when they do this, they begin to appreciate a little bit more the life that they're living right now, right? Opportunity for gratitude, opportunity to see, do I even like the way that I live my regular life? Or, are there changes that I might want to make, that you can, when you actually take the time to document those things, then you have it reflected back to you, and you can make other choices. So I also, one of the things that Matt said made me think, and I jotted down on my notes here, I encourage people, as they're going about even their own, when you're writing stories about your own life, is thinking about what you wish you knew about someone else. So what do you wish you knew about your parents? And I always talk about how, my mom is still living. She's in her 70s. I can say to her, Mom, when you were a young mom, how did you feel? Or what was life like then? And she can remember bits and pieces, just like I can remember bits and pieces of yesterday. Right? She can remember bits and pieces, but if she would have been documenting it while she was living it, I would have a richer understanding of what her life looked like at that point in time, and what were the things that were actually really important to her, and what were the things that were hard, and what were the things that were easy. I'm like, I want to know all those things. And so I use that as information for when I tell my own stories. What do I wish I knew about someone else? Those are the kinds of stories that I want to tell too.
Oh, fantastic lenses, facts and feelings, everyday life, what you wish you would know about someone in their stage of life or their experience, the legacy list. And Allie, I want to make sure the Day in the Life is a project that you sort of host, and you do Week in the Life and December Daily and a handful of other things.
I got all kinds of projects.
All kinds of projects. And AllieEdwards.com, so that's where those are. Of course, because everyone's going to be like, where do I learn more about this? Stephen, I think, think about, this is the opportunity in the space that Stephen and I get to spend our work life in, which is thinking globally. How can we facilitate and invite people into a place where they can discover their story? And let me just say, it's an honor and a gift to do that, and to sit here in conversation with the four of you and everyone who's participating. Please know how earnestly we all feel, not just FamilySearch, but the four of us, about the opportunity for people to really understand themselves through story, and through the funny, and through the objects, and through the loss, and through the changes. But Stephen, what invitation would you give people to help them kind of discover their own story?
Well, thanks. My wife's grandmother is going to be very similar to many people So she, she was always going to write her history or write something about herself. Mm-hmm. And every time we meet her, says, "Well, Grandma, what have you done?" "Well, I'm still organizing. I'm getting my photos together. I'm getting my memory, and I got to get organized." And then a month later, "I'm still getting organized." Well, she died and she didn't do anything. She never wrote down a single thing she never shared any of those stories because she felt like she had to get to some point before
And it
she
needed to be perfect.
exactly.
Needed to be
And I've
perfect.
seen the same thing in my mother, who I've been trying to encourage and to tell her stories. And I just realized that this idea of I got to get organized or get perfect or find the perfect tool. Don't let those things stop you, right? Just start. I love the counsel of what we're hearing from Matt and Ali. It's just whatever works for you, whether it is a piece of paper, whether it's online, whether it is your phone, audio recording, just get started. Because I think that barrier is really what's stopping us. I inherited, Wendy's heard this story. I'm going to keep it super brief.
I love it. I can't
I
wait.
inherited a tomato box from my grandmother, and it literally was a box of produce that you throw tomatoes into, and it was a bunch of junk thrown in there, and nobody knew what it was. Nobody cared. My uncle had passed away. It was from my grandmother, and so I inherited it because I'm like the family history guy, right? Like, just look at it. We don't care what's, throw it away, whatever. And a bunch of old, sewing patterns and stuff. So I dig down in there, and at the bottom, I start finding just priceless treasures, including this letter here. This is 1920. This is from my grandfather to one of you mentioned this, to a woman I'd never heard about before. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. It's a love letter from my grandfather to some Inez Loin. I'm like, who is this? How dare she, right? My grandfather only ever loved Anna Jensen, right? And I find out all of a sudden this, I'm like, wait, he was in love with her. He was going to marry her. Why didn't he? And then I go into some historical newspaper. I was like, I got to find out who's Inez Loin. And I find out that tragically, as they're dating, as they're getting close to getting married, she'd been working on a cherry farm in Utah. She was walking home covered in stains, and she would get mocked by the boys driving on the streets. So she went off the road to get away from the bullying and harassment, and she was struck by a train and killed. And that was it. And my grandfather was, of course, devastated. It changed his whole life. And it was years later he finally married my grandmother. But suddenly I'm like, that's my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And I sit down with my mom and I'm like, let me tell you a story that she had never heard before. And all of a sudden she's like, that's why he was this, and that explains this. And she, all of a sudden, this whole thing opened up, right? Well, so to me, it was, I got to get things out of these tomato boxes. Everybody has a tomato box, right? What's yours? Get it out and start telling the stories. Sit down with your mom, sit down with your grandma, whoever it is, right? And it's usually the females in our family. And what I do is I just turn on my phone and I start recording. And now I've got the story. I have her voice. I have her funny laugh as she learns more things. And then, my little tiny shameless plug for FamilySearch is we've been around for 125 years, and we are in the business of preserving these stories and sharing them. So at some point, don't worry about this right now, but at some point you're like, hey, I want to make sure that that's never lost. I want to put that online in some place that I know it'll be there for hundreds of years. Come and share it on FamilySearch in your tree. And we'll just help make sure that never is lost, that it's always preserved.
Wow. Okay. Ali and Matt were just so responding to the love letter and just this idea of objects that Ali talked about, and Matt saying, who's this other person and this significant piece. And the thing I want to highlight from Stephen's story is it didn't stop with seeing this artifact or this object or this letter. Like, he pushed and he explored, and that's the invitation, right? That's the invitation. And Matt, you do that professionally with people. This is so great. But okay, we need to sort of get to our last question, and we want to remind everyone watching that there's tons of content here about story, and you'll be able to find stuff by Matt and Ali, and we are just excited to hear from you. Make sure and mention questions you might have in the chat, or let us know what you think. We're eager to hear from you and learn from you as well. But I think this last question I want to ask is, how do we then share these stories that we have, uncovered, or how can we kind of extend, these things that we've learned? And Stephen, we talk a lot about at FamilySearch the opportunity to kind of learn about our past, but also to kind of pass something on, and this idea of legacy. So I think my last question really is what can we do to share the stories that we learn? And any sort of last recommendations you have as we wrap up? And Stephen, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think, and Matt talked about, you got to share it, right? There has to be a listener as well as a teller. And so I that's what I love about where we are in our kind of life online, is it just opens up our opportunity to share and to share with your family and friends as widely as possible. So I guess, my advice is using whatever channel is comfortable to you, get that story out there in whatever. I mean, I took the tomato box and I ended up publishing like a book out of it. I wrote a book, but I know a lot of people don't want to read that book. So for each chapter, I created like a little 2-minute video that I've got up on YouTube. And so now my nieces and nephews, they'll watch 2 minutes, but they're not going to read a whole book, right? And so I think it's thinking about how can you make your story approachable to the listener, make it interesting, make it compelling, right? Something that they want to spend their time. They're all going to watch the crazy cat video, but they'll probably consume a really compelling bite-sized story too, right? And so I think it's about the channel, leveraging the channels you're comfortable with, make it, I think, compelling, and maybe not too long would be my advice. Something that they can consume, right? And just get it out there for people.
Oh, I love that. And I love, Stephen, how you talk about how doing this, and it gives people sort of something to come around and share and reminisce. And I think that's an important part of the sharing, is like, it's a collective piece too. Matt, what recommendations would you have for people on how to share their stories?
Similar there. I mean, it's why I came to RootsTech the first time, was to actually find ways to share these stories. I was leaving people's houses with boxes of pictures, and then they're like, what do I do next? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And so, I mean, get curious, get excited. I would say the one thing we're skipping over here is a lot of times we try to leave it on the oldest generation. And like, that's probably not the best idea. If we really want the stories, like, maybe we could I mean, I'm 45 and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to bed at 9. Like, it's not happening. And so like what Steve did very quietly was when he talked, I think it was your grandma you're talking about, where she passed. We all have that story where the storyteller passed, but we have the technology now, and we have the way. I mean, it's why I partner with FamilySearch. I mean, we can get this out. So like, don't be afraid. Like, maybe you have to be the one that asks grandma questions versus saying, grandma, go create this, because she doesn't have time to create it. So like, do a little bit of the work, get started. I mean, dude, we're all doing this on Zoom right now. Like, this is a great tool, right? Like, and the one thing, when you were telling that story about your grandpa and you said the name Inez, we all were like, oh, right. And don't lose the eye. I mean, I love video because you get the reaction from all the other family members. And don't forget, with the technology that exists now, kids that don't even exist yet will watch this. And they'll be like, oh my God, look at Grandpa Matt. He had hair and he only weighed 200 pounds, right? Like, so and that's part of the storytelling too. So get it documented, man, and do the work for grandma and grandpa. They're too tired to do it. So get them started and just let them do what they're supposed to do, which we all want everybody to do, which is share stories. If all they got to do is tell the story, the rest will work itself out. The technology that we find at this conference will be better ways for us to do it.
Oh, I thank you so much. And I think you touched on listening and asking and being curious. That goes with sharing.
That's my job. I'm just a curious person in people's houses. That's it. I got the best job in the world.
Yes, you do. It sounds great. And I want to state how interesting it was when Stephen did say Inez. There's a personal piece there that we all reacted to. So I think that's important in telling.
Like, tell me more.
I want to know more about Inez. Yeah,
I know, right? I feel connected to Inez. Okay, Allie, what's your recommendation on sharing?
I'll get to that. I wanted to say one thing that I find important to include in this conversation too. When you're thinking about your audience or a listener, right? I really never want to discount the valuing yourself as a listener. And I think we see that, or I see that a lot with people in my community, women that are single by choice or circumstance or situation, where a lot of times they feel like my story isn't worth telling because I don't have an audience, right? There's nobody here that, you know, I don't have kids, so I can't scrapbook, or I don't have kids, so I can't tell my story. And I am a firm believer in that I tell my story because I want to tell my story for myself more than anyone else, because that is how I make sense of my life. So I wanted to make sure just to say that about, you know, that there is value in ourselves as our own audience for, you know, having stories reflected back to us by taking the time to write them down. So in what I do, the documenting is creative, right? And that is the avenue that, or the place that I come from in terms of making scrapbooks. And in the scrapbooking industry these days, there's a really wide variety of different ways that people tell stories, and it can be a lot less creative, you know, in the sense of it doesn't have to have all the cutesy things on top of it. It can be focused on the words and photos, and there's a lot of different ways that people are approaching it, from personal art journaling to just slipping photos and a journaling card into a pocket and calling that good. So there's a lot of different ways that people can do that. And so you can, my site has lots of examples of that kind of thing on there. But I also wanted to echo, just using social media, especially Instagram, for me has continued to be a place that I consider it as a holding place for my stories. So I will throw up a picture of one of my kids doing something I observed, something that I want to remember. It gives me the opportunity to have it held there, right? And yes, there's an audience, but it's also a holding place for a story that I witnessed, right? I'm paying attention. I'm looking at my life. I'm looking for stories. I definitely have a storytelling mindset. That's how I approach my life generally. So when I see something, when I see my family sitting around the table, and I think about all the different stories that come up from gathering around the dinner table, from homework to games to arguments to talking prison, which is what one of my kids calls it, you know, when we're having a discussion, it's talking prison at the table. But I see those stories, and that's what I take a picture of. That's what I post on Instagram. That's the story I write. And that is a way of documenting, whether or not you do anything else with it after the fact. So
Thank you. Wow. I know I've said that wow so many times, but what I want to say as we close is to everyone participating, we're here to invite you into a space of story. And I think you've gotten lots and lots of ideas and recommendations and reasons that your story matters. And we want to extend an invitation to enter into the story space however you choose to do so. And we will champion and really cheer everybody on. And Allie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm
your
happy
expertise.
to be here. Yeah.
Yes. And Matt, we're excited to continue watching Legacy List and following the stories you continue to unearth. And
we're casting right now for season 3 if you want your family story.
Okay, this is great. Yes. And Stephen, thank you for taking the time and sharing the harmonica and the Inez story. I think that was very powerful.
Thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Okay.